guys, my name is Meredith Hassett and I'm here to help you take the sorcery out of building APIs today. Building APIs doesn't have to feel like a bunch of black magic. It should be really simple with all of the technologies that we have today, but yet many times when you're using many of these tools, it requires a lot of setup and overhead costs. You're creating not only a database and an application and a couple different servers to do your testing. Maybe you're also writing YAML files. There's a lot of overhead just to get your API out the door and start doing your work and start testing against your API while connecting it to your data source or your functionality that you want to expose. We want to really simplify creating REST APIs for your website or database. So let me show you a tool and build an API with you over the next 30 minutes. Today, we're going to be focusing on REST APIs and more specifically, the get and post verbs. If you're unfamiliar with REST or those verbs that I just mentioned, just think of it as a get is a read from a database. So that's your select statement, and a post is an insert into a database. So that is your insert statement in SQL. So hopefully this will help you guide you on this journey. And then all you need is a little bit of knowledge of JavaScript and you'll be able to follow along with us today. So as I mentioned, my name is Meredith Hassett. I am a front-end developer by trade, but just because I am a front-end developer or I identify as a front-end developer doesn't mean I think the back-end is any less important. In fact, everything we're going to be doing today is back-end work. I just generally prefer someone else to be doing the heavy lifting for me and creating those APIs. So I like to call myself an integration witch. I do a lot of integrations. I like to talk about those integrations that I've done and worked with. So if you want to check out some of the integrations that I've already built, feel free to follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is mlhassett, and you can find me there. I'll be tweeting about different integrations I built, as well as the content that you'll be seeing here today. We're going to be doing a lot more of it, so feel free to follow along there. Also, if you just want daily doses of happiness, I'm in the process of adopting some kittens, so feel free to check me out there if you want to just see some really cute kitten pics too. And last but not least, I am a dev advocate for Corvid by Wix. So I'm excited to show you how Corvid can help you take your knowledge of JavaScript and expose HTTP functions here today. Without further ado, I think it's time we start trick-or-treating and show you how when you go door to door, you can actually use APIs to do the trick-or-treating for you. Let's get started building some REST APIs so we can trick-or-treat. But first, I think I need to change it to my costume. All right, I'll be right back. On this episode of Tiger Kings, building REST APIs, right? Okay, let's start with that one, actually. So I'm actually going to switch over here to our haunted house. So this is what the haunted house we're going to be working with today. I know, it's very Windows 95 screensaver. I purposely did that because that was my favorite screensaver ever. So as you can see, I'm definitely a UX designer. No, I'm not. I definitely focus on the development. But we have our little spooky haunted house here. And what we're going to look at is when we knock on our door to go to our neighbor's house to trick or treat, that knock on the door is actually going to open up a little light box here, which is going to enable us to put our post URL. So the way I want you to think of this is we're going to our neighbor's house, and when we knock on the door, this little pop-up box asking for our post URL is actually going to be the equivalent of us if we were actually trick-or-treating, going to our neighbor and putting out our candy basket. So instead of handing maybe like your pillowcase or your little jack-o'-lantern, you're handing over a post URL. And what your neighbor is going to do is it's going to take in that post URL and try to actually fetch post to that URL. So I've already built the fetch component of this, and we're just going to be focused on building the post version of this for us here too. We're going to start with a get though, because it's a little bit more simple to do get versus post. So we're going to be building both of those services here today. And then we can use that get for our little candy basket. So if we knock over our candy basket here, it'll empty out all the candy we've already collected. So right now we've already collected a few candies and we're seeing them here. And we can use that get function that we're going to create to retrieve the different candies that we're going to have in our database. Again, I have everything set up from the back-end perspective, but we only need this one tool to actually create all of this functionality. So let me go ahead and switch over to my editor. So as a reminder, this is going to be our orange house. So this is going to be our neighbor's house. We have to go work on our house. So our house is going to be the brick house because it's a brick house. I don't know. So our brick house here is going to be our home base where we need to make sure that A, we have a candy that we're ready to post. B, we have a get function that enables us to see all of the candy that we already have. And C, we have a post function to actually be able to go trick-or-treating this year. Because trick-or-treating looks a little bit differently. So this is our social distance version. So the first thing I want to do is, as you can see, this is the Wix editor, but it's a little bit augmented, where we have a site structure pane there and then an embedded IDE here. And so our embedded IDE enables us to actually add JavaScript code to our Wix site. So this is where Corbett comes in and helps us. And as you can see, I already have a little bit of code written here. So if you remember, the ghosts were kind of floating along. We've used an animations timeline to enable them to do their floating. I've already stubbed out the on-click function for our door here. The only thing we need to fill in is our candy. So we'll go ahead and add that. So let's go ahead and pick a candy. This year, I feel like giving out maybe nerds. I don't know. That just sounds really good. And it's really cool to be a nerd these days. So let's give those out. This is going to come from our HalfStack conference. We're going to use the date as now for our collected time. And then I'm going to use an image URL to actually show that visual representation of that candy. Because if you remember on that page when we looked in our candy basket, we could actually see the candy that we've already collected. So this is going to enable us to actually visually see that. The way we do that with Wix is if I look at trick or treat, if I look at candy basket, we have these things called repeaters, and repeaters are essentially a more visual representation of a grid. So instead of showing data in like the table column format, you can use a repeater to actually make it a more visual and pleasant and more user-friendly experience. So we can just attach the images to the grid, and then if you noticed, when I hovered over different candies here, I'm using the alt text to further explain what the candy image that you're actually seeing is. So we're seeing M&Ms that were actually collected at Sandy's house. So that enables you to add more information beyond just the image. So let's go back, double check that our candy is ready to go. Awesome, it looks great. So now what we need to be able to do is actually create those functions to get and send candy from our house. So what I need to do is I need to actually go to the back end of my application. And here you'll see I already have one file created, and this is going to be our helper to help us actually send the candy. So when someone comes and knocks on our door, what we're going to be able to do is use this functionality to actually attempt to post that candy object that we just filled out to the fellow user site. So if someone else was to come trick-or-treating at my house, when you knock on my door, give me your post URL. I'm going to call this function to send my candy object to that URL that you created for me. And so we already have that stubbed out and created for us here, so we don't have to do that heavy lifting. The only heavy lifting we have to do is actually creating the HTTP functions. So to do that, I have to create a new file here, and it does require a specific naming in Wix, because this will automatically start generating your mock and live server for your HTTP functions. So when I name my file over here, HTTP functions, and hit enter, I'm automatically going to get a bunch of code already pre-written about this, because Wix is recognizing those keywords as you want to create an exposed HTTP functions. You want REST services available from your site. So let me automatically create some code for you to make it a little bit simpler. And these are just some examples of how you can build out different functions. As you can see, we have an example get, and that is the format that we need to be using to name our functions, where you see the verb of the functionality and then the function name. So we're going to be following this model to actually create our get and post requests. I don't actually need all of this sample code, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove it because it's going to make my life a little bit easier just to start from scratch. I am going to keep these import statements at the top here, though, because when you have these APIs available from Wix, like the HTTP functions API, we don't want to import everything, so we do need these import functions to select the different functionality we want to bring along with us. So for example, here we have OK, which is really handy for get, and then we have bad request. So if we want to return instead of a 200 message, we want to return a 400 or 500 message, we also have functions that enable us to return those as well. For a GET request, OK is going to work just fantastically for us, so we can keep that. The last thing that we want to do is actually import Wix Data as well. So again, not all of the Wix APIs are available without importing them because this is a web application platform. So we don't want you to be carrying around all of this extra weight if you're not going to be actually using it. So we do actually require that you import an different functionality that you want that isn't standard out of the box. If you check out our API reference, you can see everything that's available from the API reference. So the other functionality that you can import from HTTP functions, like for the post, we're actually going to also need created. So let me go ahead and add that in there too. We can also do a server error. So there's a bunch of different error handling as well as success messages that you can be using. So these are the only things that we need to import to actually create our APIs or REST APIs. So after that, we can actually go ahead and get started. Now that we have all of our import statements, we're ready to actually start writing the code to do the functionality of our GET and POST requests. So what I want to do is I want to start stubbing out those functions. The first thing is they need to be exported because we want these to be reachable from outside. So when I export it, that means other people are able to reach it. Then I want to name my function that specific name where I have the verb of what I'm trying to do. So in this case, let's start with the get. And then we want all my candy. So this is basically going to be a select star from our database. So we have our function verb and then our function name, which this is going to be crucial later on when we actually try to test this API, because we're going to be able to use that function name to actually construct our REST API URL and try to reach this all my candy function. I'm then going to create an object called options. And what options is going to do is it's going to hold all of the information that I need for the browser to be able to understand my request. So in this case, the number one thing I need here is my content type to be defined as application JSON. And this is headers, even though I only have one. So if you need any additional header information for your application or browser to be able to interpret what you're doing here, you would want to go ahead and add it here, such as if you require authorization and you wanted to add any auth here, or if you have any cross-origin issues that you need to handle, this is where you would handle all of that as well. For this demo purposes, we just need to be using the application JSON content header, and that's it. We're then going to be able to actually start calling the database to get all of our information for our candy. So if we take a look at the database, I already have it created here. So I'm going to go to the left side pane, go to my candy basket. And as you can see here, when it loads, I already have some fields stubbed out, which are the fields that I used when I created that candy JSON object a little bit earlier, if you remember. And I can check the names of the properties if I want to. So I have like the visual user name and then also the more important key, which is going to be what we're going to be using as developers. So if you wanted to do any filtering and you needed to figure out what the property name was, you just need the key here from the field. So everything we're going to be doing needs to be returned because it needs to be sent out again. So we're going to go ahead and return the start of our query. So to build a query, I use the Wix Data API and I just query the collection name, where the collection name is that database that we just looked at. So ours is called Candy Basket. So I'm going to go ahead and type that in. So that is our select star. If you wanted to do anything that wasn't select star, this is where you could actually start building out those more complicated queries. So if you need to check if it is between certain values, contains, you want to do just distincts or counts, any aggregate functions as well, this is where you would start building out that query. For us, we're just going to do a select star. So all I want to do is find. Now find is promised, so I need to wait for that promise to resolve. So I'm going to have a then and wait for the result. And then once the result is returned, this is where you can do some error handling if you need to as well. So if the result doesn't return anything for you, this is where you can add in that functionality. So we could also do a catch for errors and return maybe a bad request or a server error. I'm going to focus on the happy path case here. So I'm just going to try to retrieve the result items where the result is the resolve of the Wix Data query. So it has a little bit of other information in there, like the query parameters that you tried to use, if any of them failed and things like that. So really handy for debugging here as well. And validating your request too. We're mostly just interested in the items. So I'm going to actually attach that to our options array in the body area. And I want this to be equal to items from our candy basket. So that is, result items. So that'll be our array of items returned from our result. You might also want to do some checking here too. So just to double check that, like if result.items is greater than 0, just to make sure that something was actually returned, then you would actually return this as the body. I'm not too worried about error handling right now, so I think we're good to go. The last thing I want to do is I want to return from this promise so we can start wrapping everything up. And we want to return OK in this case because this is a get, and an OK will return a 200 success for us, which we like to see, and that is of options. So we want to return that options is good to go and give it the HTTP status code of 200, which if you're unfamiliar with status codes, 200s are successes, 400s and 500s are generally different types of errors. So we want 200 to be returned when something is good. If something is bad, we would want to return depending on if we know the error, such as if it was unauthorized, then we could return like a 401. If it wasn't found, we could do a 404. If we just don't really know what's happening, we can send that 500 server error. So we can, in this case, we just want a 200 because this is going to be good to go if this returns an items object. So now you can use whatever tool you prefer for testing APIs. Mine is Postman. So I'm going to bring up Postman. I already have the function here. So you can see that I want to make sure it's a get. I want to get the name of my site. So if you need to get that, what you do is you go to publish. This will give you your site URL. So go ahead and copy that. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And then we need to construct a specific URL here. So in order to get to the HTTP functions that we've exposed when we published our site, we need to type _functions, and this will get us into that HTTP functions file that we've been creating here. And this will give us the different functions that we have. So in this case, I want the all my candy function, which if you forget what your function name is, it's just going to be, remember that second half of your function name in your file. So in this case, it's all my candy. Go back over to Postman. And so when I go ahead and send this, I'm getting a 200 OK, which we like, that is good. And then our items is empty, which actually makes sense because if I look back in our database again, we have both a sandbox version and a live version, but we're hitting the live version. And in the live, there is no data already there. So that makes sense why we're not getting any data returned. So once we create our post function and actually add candy to our database, we can take a look at our get again to make sure that we're actually getting candy. So that's our get function. Now we're ready to move on to our post function. So this will enable us to retrieve candy from different sites. So we'll test it on Postman, and then we'll go back to that orange house, because if you remember, we're the brick house. and the orange house is going to be our tester house. So I'm going to go ahead and again export a new function here. That's going to actually this time start with post, because remember we're trying to post new candy into our database or insert it. And then collect new candy is going to be our function name here. Also going to take in a request object, where this request object is going to be a lot more important, because now that we're doing a post, we are looking for the object that we're trying to insert into the database. So we're expecting a JSON object to be in this request. Similarly with gets, if you're expecting any filter query parameters, you can use the request object to grab those query parameters and then use them in your filtering of your database. So this Wix query would become a little bit more complicated, but since we were just doing a select star, we didn't have to worry about the request. For our post, we do care about the request. So we'll take a look at that in a second, but the first thing we need to do again is actually recreate our options header. So I'm just going to go steal that, because that's going to be, again, that object that we're going to return with all of the information that you need to understand what happened with your request. So now when I actually start building out my return statement here, I want to actually start with the request, and the first thing I want to try to do is parse out the body in JSON format. So I'm going to try to parse out the JSON object. This is a promised function, so I have to wait for the body to return to me to be able to work with it. So I want to get the body object in JSON format so I can actually retrieve that JSON object of the candy that we created earlier and use it to post into our database. If we successfully get the body back, then I want to use that to do our insert. So in this case, I want to go to Wix Data, and instead of query, we're going to use insert this time. And insert is going to be similar to query, where we take in a collection name, which is candy basket again, and then our item is just going to be that body object. If your database had any sort of permissions that prevented you from writing and you needed to overwrite them at this point, or there was any additional information you needed to provide to your database, you could provide it in this optional third options parameter. We don't need it, so I'm going to go ahead and just remove it. Insert is also a promise function, so I need to wait for that to resolve to make sure that my data was actually added to my candy basket. So I'm going to go ahead and wait for that to fulfill. And then on success of that, I want to return what we inserted. Because if you think about it, like every time you've done a post request, it tells you, okay, you tried to insert this. This is what I did insert. It gives you that response back of what it did try to do. Inserted one row into database, inserted this data into database. So we want to make sure that we are returning that same information to our users who are trying to reach our post. So in our options object in the body, instead of items being returned, what we're going to be returning is inserted and the result that we did insert. And then we can return from here to wrap up our promise. And instead of using OK, we're going to use created, which is going to return a 201, where a 201 is specifically a created success HTTP status code. And then we're going to return options. Awesome. So with options returned, if we successfully insert it into the database, we're going to see a 201 status code. If you did want to add some error handling, let's take a look at what that might look like. So on failure, let's go ahead and add a catch. We're going to catch the error. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to do something very similar to this, but instead of inserted, we're going to change that to error, and we're going to return the error. And then instead of returning a created, we're going to go ahead and return maybe a bad request of our options. So this way we'll specifically send back a 400 error code. With that, I think we are ready to actually test out our post. So I'm going to go ahead and publish. So the live version is available of this. There is a way that you can also, without publishing, test this in a QA version. The information about the URL construction for your test QA version of your HTTP function is available in the Wix API reference. I would recommend you take a look at that if you're interested in not publishing before your testing. I am just going to publish it because this is a personal site that I'm working on, not a production one. So I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to change this a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make this a post. I'm going to change the functions from all my candy to collect new candy. And collect new candy is expecting, remember, that candy object in the body. So I have to go back here to body. I'm going to go switch it over to raw JSON, and I'm going to actually construct that candy object. The candy, remember, takes in a title, and maybe in this case, what do we feel like having today? Do Twizzlers sound good? Let's do Twizzlers. Twizzlers. We also had a quantity field. Quantity. This is why I was an engineer. I can't spell. We have our candy image, which I have a URL for. And then we also have a house maybe. So this will be our HalfStack test. Oops, need a comma there. Beautiful. Okay, so I think this is enough information to try to attempt our post. So again, remember we switched it over to post because that is the function we are trying to work with here. We're trying to post to the collect new candy. So we also updated the function name to collect new candy. We went over to our body and added a new JSON object, which we're going to try to insert Twizzlers into our database. So I'm going to go ahead and send this request. I'm seeing that 201 created, so we didn't hit the catch, we didn't hit the error. So hopefully we successfully actually inserted into the database. And the way I can look at this is if I go here to the database candy basket. I want my live database. I can see my Twizzlers are created there. And this also means that if I do my get function, so maybe I'll leave this one and create a new tab here. And I want this guy, but we want, instead of collect new candy, all my candy, right? For our get, when I go ahead and send that over, I am seeing some candy being actually returned to me now, which is awesome. Great success. We actually do have candy in our candy basket. Wonderful. So now I think we actually have to go trick-or-treating, right? So let's go ahead and go to our live site. So when we publish our site and go to view, here's our spooky haunted house. If I dump over my candy basket, I should see at least that Twizzler in there, which I am. Awesome. So we already have our candy. And then I want to go trick-or-treating at my friend's house. So let's go ahead and I'm going to grab our Postman post URL here. Oops. Command A. And I'm going to take that URL that I've just copied, and I'm going to go to my neighbor's house. Oops. That's not my neighbor's house. That's still my house. Is this my neighbor's house? There's my neighbor's house. I'm going to go to my neighbor's house. I'm going to knock on the door, and I'm going to go ahead and post my URL here. I'm going to go ahead and trick or treat. And now we have to see if I got my new candy. So I'll go back over to my house, my brick house, knock over my candy basket, and I got a Kit Kat from my neighbor. Awesome. And if we want to just verify that we've gotten some candy, again, we can always use a tool like Postman to double check that we're getting all of that candy there. So I hope you guys had some fun trick-or-treating with me. Again, my name is Meredith Hassett. I am a dev advocate for Corvid by Wix. So if you want to reach out to me and learn more about how to create HTTP functions with Wix, learn more about integrations that you can do, or just some cool other web dev stuff, feel free to follow me on Twitter and reach out with any questions. Again, you can find me at ML Hassett on Twitter. And thank you, HalfStack. It's been a pleasure being with you here, and happy Halloween.
Thank you, Meredith. That was lovely. And I see you've gotten into the Nightmare Before Christmas spirit with the spooky tree, which feels like a Christmas tree with some Halloween decor in front of it. That's great.
Yeah. It is like a little bit darker than a Christmas tree, and it has some like fog in the bottom. So I guess that's what make it not Christmas, but
I bet if they like put some real spiders in it, that would help with the vibe too, but not the sellability of it.
Well, we do have the idea of a spooky tree. I think this needs to be a new tradition.
Yeah, I know. It's like we need a tree for every holiday, I guess, right? We just can buy more trees.
Wait a second. Christian was saying this in the chat earlier. At the start of the Nightmare Before Christmas movie, there's a tree for every holiday.
Yes, exactly.
I'll have to rewatch it. I don't remember that part.
I know, it's been way too long.
So many people need to rewatch Nightmare Before Christmas today.
Yes, today. Must be today. Your day is almost over. How is that going to work, Joe?
It's a Christmas movie, Halloween movie. It's for that special time in between, for November.
Yeah. We have another holiday in the middle, but you don't. Like, you just flip a switch from Halloween to Christmas. We have like this natural Thanksgiving barrier that kind of... So most of our Christmas stuff doesn't really take off till late November, but in the UK, it's like November 1st, boom, you're like full on Christmas.
Yeah. So I have to say, I think America's starting to skip Thanksgiving too, because we were just at Lowe's the other day and all Christmas trees. Like they just skipped.
This
Halloween.
year, they think because of COVID, they're not going to be able to get things and the supplies they need. So they're trying to get people to buy early. So like they're doing like Black Friday holiday specials now because they're like, well, we don't want to create demand in November. And I'm like, that sounds kind of non-fun. But there was I saw a tweet yesterday, and it was someone had like the Google Trends chart of All I Want for Christmas by Mariah Carey. And they're like, it's beginning, because they were seeing like a little spike up. and Mariah Carey responds to the tweet with just not yet. Like, please, not yet. It's too early. Yeah.
I mean, it's a great track. I would listen to it all year round.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Oh, yeah. There was that Hugh Grant movie where like he has the one song, there's a Christmas jingle or something. Yeah. Kind of reminds me of that. Obviously, she was much more successful than that. So, Meredith, how have you been dealing with this crazy year? Like, what's been different for you and what's been the same, and how have you coped?
So my first coping mechanism was to adopt some kittens. So we've got Montgomery Scott watching here from my room, helping out.
Is he a good engineer?
No,
not
yet.
Not yet.
No, we're working on it. He's got to go through his training.
Yep.
So that was a coping mechanism. But I mean, the main difference is, especially in like the developer relations space, like we do a lot of conferences and stuff. And obviously all of those conferences have pivoted to online. We were kind of focusing on different regions, and now regions aren't really like as a thing anymore. So we're still doing a lot of the same activities. It's just doing it in a totally different format, which has actually been really awesome because we get to learn a little bit more about our community, and I feel like engage with a lot more of the community than the specific, because as much as in-person stuff is nice, like you only get to meet so many people who are able to join the events. So yeah, it's the same but different.
Yeah, I hear you. It's like I usually travel a ton, and so I joke that like it's my fault that COVID happened because I decided to like stop what I was doing after 20 years and do a startup this year. And so it's actually been kind of a blessing that I have time to like write code and just sit down and focus instead of traveling all the time. But obviously it's not my fault, but it feels like it's my fault because like I needed this actually this year. I didn't quite want to like be stuck at home all the time, but it was nice to sort of not be flying every week or two kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So have you found your home office setup has kind of evolved over the last few months?
Other than the spooky
Yeah.
tree, of course.
Yes. Well, I keep moving because it's like I have nothing better to do. So I'm like, let me move my desk around. So I've tried like the 360-degree orientation. Got some new monitors, some new components for the computer, some whatchamacallit, ring lights, like just so many random gadgets. I feel like if something goes on sale on Amazon, I'm like, yep, purchase, like prime it here next tomorrow. And it's
Yeah.
just
I feel like I keep
all
Kickstarter and Indiegogo in business personally. It's like, how many chargers do I possibly need? Clearly, I don't have enough like portable chargers. There's always like a new one with better capacity and faster, whatever. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, I also have 3 kids, and no matter what, like I turn around and the portable charger's dead for a phone because like I plug it in and they don't know how to plug things back in. It seems so. Yeah, good times.
The joys, the joys. So
Yeah.
I've got a question. So obviously you're working for Wix in developer relations in some way, shape, or form. Is it part of the Wix family mantra that you wear cat-like face paint when you give talks, or is that your own take on this?
that was my own take. I am a cat enthusiast, as I like to say, and I only recently adopted kittens, so I didn't have them before, so I had to make my own cat fun, and I was just trying to get in the holiday spirit for Halloween.
I mean, I had
Okay.
assumed you adopted the kitten specifically for HalfStack, so I guess we
Of
can.
course.
Obviously, yeah. Oh
We
man,
have to start a Tabby Cats of HalfStack the Twitter feed or something.
that would be funny. So, do you find your like what sort of stuff do you do for like what do you work on when you're like writing code? Like you obviously create fun Halloween apps, and I love the retro Windows 95 theme. Do you identify as like a JavaScript engineer, a front-end engineer, or like a more of a multi-faceted, like I'll hack on anything kind of engineer?
I'm definitely engineering curious, so I like to explore different parts of the technology and kind of dive in whenever I can. So this was a newer experience for me. I mostly focus on front end, I would say, and JavaScript dev, and being able to build HTTP functions. Like I normally do a lot of stuff on the opposite side of that, of consuming REST services and REST APIs. So a lot of the stuff you'll find me doing is like, for example, right now with the fantasy football going on in the US, for fingers crossed a little bit longer, I've been building an app to try to help me better my team because they're all injured or questionable, and I'm having 0-point players week after week. So I'm trying to find ways to bring technology into all of my passion areas too. So I like to build things that use other people's integrations. Like Twilio is another big one I use a lot. And so this was fun for me to kind of dive into the flip side of that and actually building those APIs and finding an easier way for developers to do that.
Nice.
Really cool. And the platform seemed really nice to work with. Have you got any comments on that? Was it your first time using that side of Wix, or?
When I joined the company, yeah, it was my first time using the developer tools within Wix. And I find it really powerful because it's like a lot of the headaches that I would deal with as a developer in other roles or as a product manager back over at SAP is when we would try to build these platforms. It's like, what tool do we want to use? And then we would build it, and then we weren't like SEO friendly. And that's such like a hassle, or like you take forever to just change one little component on the screen because you got to restructure the whole CSS of it. And we would just take months and months and months to build these things, and being able to do that so much faster and really kind of push things out the door. Especially when like COVID happened, it was amazing to see how many people were able to pivot their business to online. And so it's been a really impactful time to like have joined the company right before all this happened and see how we can actually really help people. So that's been a real joy to explore the technology and make sure that people can continue their business even when they can't have in-person shops or opportunities.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Meredith. That was really useful and informative and helpful. And thanks for being part of HalfStack. And we'll talk to you soon. Oh, cat overload. Yay.